All right, we are live. Welcome to the Godful Universe podcast. Today we're going to be talking with Doug Ernst, the great Doug Ernst. But right now, I've got to shill our book because I have an artist that I don't pay because he owns half of the company. And if I don't shill it and we don't make money, he doesn't make money. So give me just a second, guys. Let me figure out how to do this. There we go. All right, Apollyon 20XX Volume 2, lest we forget, is on Indiegogo, Kickstarter, and Fund My Comic. We're sitting pretty well on all of these. It is book 2 of our Apollyon 20XX series. The series is about a global order. It's trying to take over the world. They're kind of like our Brotherhood of the Snake or Illuminati type figures. They've been using an alien metal called Impera metal to experiment with people, and they've created augments. These are kind of like our mutants. Some of these have escaped, and they are trying to stop the order before they can create a god machine to take over the world. It's a really cool story. This volume is 100 pages, black and white. We've also got volume 1 right here in the catch-up tier. That's 185 pages. And we're doing that catch-up tier, so both books and a 6-page ash can, for $35. It's a pretty cool deal. It's close to 300 pages for $35. We've also got the Apollyon 20, the Godful Universe catch-up tier. That is both books, the ash can and Biophile Kolga, which is another story in our universe that takes place 1,000 years after this one. So that bundle is 400 pages for $50. We've also got digital tiers. Just check it out. If you're into a kind of gritty black and white, if you're into, it's kind of a cross between Chris Claremont's X-Men and the manga Akira. It's a bold statement, I know, but I think you'll like it. It's good. Josh's art speaks for itself. Pick those up on Fund My Comic, Kickstarter, Indiegogo. With that out of the way, let's bring in our guest, Mr. Doug Ernst. How you doing, man?
Hey, man. Great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Always. So, last time you were here, he kept using this phrase, and I know it's a Christian phrase, but I know some people. Well, first of all, I'm not going to ramble. I'm going to tell myself I'm not going to ramble. We live in a post-Christian world, and I don't mean that. And I'm not trying to say that in the alarmist sense or the cultural warrior sense. It's just I think it's a fact philosophically we live in a post-Christian society. There's more people, especially kids growing up today, that are unfamiliar with biblical principles and church principles, I think, than probably any other time in American history. So the term the true, the good, and the beautiful, while is itself a true statement and beautiful and good, it may be lost on some people. And I know it's a reference to, I believe it's Paul or maybe it was Peter's writing where he says, focus on these things, what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. And I assume that's the sense you meant it in. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about that with you from, of course, inside baseball, kind of the Christian sense, and from the outside of people who don't really know what that means and how do you get to that, and especially in our current state of the world. And I realize those are big questions, but I just kind of wanted to open it up with that and what your initial thoughts were.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can go in 1,000 different directions with that one. But I mean, so if we're talking about within a religious context, like the first step would, if you believe that Christ is living truth itself, you can't force someone to believe in Christ or start to form a relationship with Christ. If you could get to the point where you believe that Christ was who he said he was, and you want to form a relationship with that person, then you're starting to walk in that direction. But I don't know if that's too, if you wanted to, like, from a non-religious point of view. But like, first you have to not that there's a problem. Well, I guess there is a problem if you're like inherently sinful and disordered because of the fall. You have to admit that there's a problem. So if you once you admit that there is a problem and you need a savior, then I guess you've taken like the first step towards getting closer to truth and having a closer relationship with truth.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to start. And if you'll run down with me, I will start with the kind of the non-religious idea, mainly because I see it. I see this conversation happening a lot. I consider myself more politically homeless. I don't really define myself as a political person. I consider myself a Christian, and some people call that a cop out. Whatever, we can get into that discussion later. But what I see is, particularly on the right wing, there's a schism that I think people don't see yet. I'm not making this political. I'll get to my point. There's a schism between the Christian conservative right, or the Christian right, and the right. It's particularly what's now called as like the dissident right, you know? And that schism is going to become more and more apparent as it becomes, how do you define what is true and good and beautiful? And if you don't define it as Christ, that's a problem.
Right.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is I feel for the world. I feel for people, especially artists, who've never even heard the idea of truth, good, and beauty, because especially in the modern academic sense, you don't learn those things. I mean, I went to college. I'm sure you did too, and you worked within kind of a liberal field. Especially in journalism, I don't think truth is necessarily important in journalism anymore, is it?
Yeah, no, in the modern days, most people who call themselves journalists are really just sort of partisan ideologues and people that try to either forward a narrative or to protect a narrative more than anything else.
Yeah, and that's I guess what I'm trying to articulate, and you just kind of help me do it. Is it seems like the true, the good, and the beautiful has been substituted or driven away for power, essentially. And I know that is the postmodern world we live in, and that is the materialist world we live in, and that is what a lot of the postmodernists came down to, is they believe, oh, in this world there's only power. And yeah, without truth and good and beauty, that's exactly true. There is only power. And I think that is the number one major hindrance of art. And to tie that back into what you and I do, especially indie comics, I do firmly believe the number one hindrance of art is money, and the focus of that, or power slash influence of other people, and how other people will perceive you.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. You mentioned college, and if you're somebody who believes that they're objective truth, and like you have all the people that are always talking about the my truth sort of
Yeah.
situation versus the truth, and it's a lonely existence going through undergrad and then ultimately graduate school, where the people that actually believe in objective moral truths is a very small sliver of the people that in my field. I'm sure
Yeah.
whatever. I was an English major for undergrad, and then I was a poli-sci
Oh, I'm
major.
so sorry, poli sci.
Yeah, no, both where try being a conservative Catholic guy in English major in Southern California, and then a poli-sci major in Washington D.C. So it was like me and like actually like one other person when I was at USC who were like conservative, and then like in graduate school there was, I guess, maybe four of us, although like two of them were sort of, I don't even know if you would call them conservative, but close enough.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is, if you don't have, I don't know how you make art without truth. If you're not, if you're not seeking it, and I forget who said it. I want to say Jordan Peterson. I don't want to give him credit for something if he didn't say it, or if I'm misquoting. I mean, but whoever said this described the difference between, I think, Dostoevsky and Ayn Rand, which I like both of those writers. I got crucified for promoting an Ayn Rand book this week, but um, he made the distinction that Ayn Rand started with an idea of how the story was going to go, like started with the end goal of getting there, an ideology. Whereas someone like Dostoevsky started with, I'm going to search for truth in my art.
Mm-hmm.
And it evolves from there, and that the story changes and goes. It's not just a straight line. And I think about that a lot in this kind of sense, the true, the good, and the beautiful, because when you go into, even if you start with a religious standpoint, even with a Christian standpoint, and that's kind of the point of it, you don't necessarily know what exactly is true, good, and beautiful. You have an idea or an image of it, but or you might have an idea of it now, but in 50 years you may not have the same view of it. It'll still be Christ. It'll still be the unchanging, true, good, and beautiful. It's just that you didn't realize it at the time. So my question is, do you find that in your art as well? Do you find that you are learning the true, the good, and the beautiful as you make your art?
Yes, that's again, these are definitely heady questions. So it's like I don't want to like totally fumble all over myself, but
Fumble away, man. I'll fumble with you.
So from my perspective, when I am in the process of writing a story and even just like mapping it out, and so I have my prayers at night, I have my prayers in the morning, and prayers throughout the day. But particularly when I'm like in the middle of a story, I'm praying for the discernment to tell the story that I need to tell that will ultimately give greater glory to God. Because I don't know and I need guidance. And so if I'm operating in a state of grace, I need to do all the things on a spiritual level to put myself in a place where the Holy Spirit could work through me to tell the story that I want to tell in a way that gives honor to God. So if I'm not in a state of grace, I'm screwing up, and my spiritual blind spots are going to be bigger. My psychological blind spots are going to be bigger. And so everything is going to be thrown off. So my job is to be as spiritually pure as possible while I'm writing, so I can be a conduit for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Because if I'm all muddied up spiritually, then I can't see, in the pool, or all these metaphors, whatever, you want to say, you're looking into the pool of your heart or whatever. And if it's filled with muddy water, you're not going to be able to see what you need to be able to see.
Yeah. And if you don't mind me saying, that seems like a very Catholic idea. I say that because I come from a Protestant background, and so much of Protestantism is everything's fine. You don't. There's no like you just said, like morning prayers, evening prayers, this kind of regiment, discipline. That's kind of missing from the Protestant background, and I think that's probably why Protestantism doesn't have as idyllic art as Catholicism does. But to take that and to take it from inside baseball of a Christian perspective, and in no means diminish it. But I often use this for not to when talking to non-Christian artists. What you just said, like various things you said about being a conduit for the Holy Spirit, I think even non-Christians can understand a shamanistic idea, and what the ancients used to say of channeling the muse. Mm-hmm. We know that if anyone took you said you studied English in college, and I think, and I did as well, I have a minor in that, but I think anyone, even in middle school or high school, will learn some kind of Greek or Roman mythology and will know what the muse is. And artists did used to believe that. They did used to think that they had to sit down day after day, and the point of skill was to court the muse. It was to treat this spirit of creativity basically like a woman you were in love with. And you needed to woo her with your artistic strength and your discipline and your control. And I'm not trying to unchristianize what you said. I'm just trying to relate it to people who may not understand some of the language that we're discussing. And that's the main thing I've been trying to get across to other artists as well, and why I wanted to have this discussion with you, so we could have that kind of inside baseball connection. I don't see like this to relate it to events on social media. There's no reason that quality and quantity can't go hand in hand.
Right.
If discipline and skill go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I mean, getting back to your other point, even artists that are not Christian, a lot of them take drugs to open themselves up to new realities and dimensions and things like that. So, a lot of musicians, what is it? Where like the Chili Peppers and the Foo Fighters and all
Oh
those
yeah,
guys. Where's that like STP? They'd go down to that mansion that is like
yeah.
infamous for whatever, and they like claim that like weird spirits like
Oh, like
affect
Crowley's
them.
Mansion. That yeah,
Yeah, so like you said, artists and writers for ages have always believed that there's, a supernatural element or something along those lines to the creative process, and that you do try to tap into, I don't know, some other realms or something like that. You're pulling these ideas out
yeah.
of the universe or whatever they want to call it. And so, from a Catholic perspective, it'd be like, yeah, there are different muses out there that you could have access to, and they might actually um, help you with some creative problems that you have. But are you speaking to good muses or are you speaking to bad muses?
Yeah, I mean that was the whole story of American rock and roll, wasn't it? That Robert Johnson or all those guys went to the crossroads and sold their soul to Satan.
Right.
And it's like, man, you think Satan would have made you a better guitar player, Robert? Eddie Van Halen, I would believe that story. Some of those blues guys, I wouldn't. But I'm a musician. I can say that. And sorry, for anyone who listens to this later, I have a smoker's cough right now because I have bronchitis. I don't mean to sound like Selma and Patty from The Simpsons, but yeah, I think that is an ignored danger. I think that's the danger of the blind spot of not viewing art or basically anything in life as as a divine conduit to the true, the good, and the beautiful. If you're not pursuing, if you don't have the proper lens, which I would say is a Christian lens to view those things, you open yourself up to very dark things. And I think that's what we've seen. I think that's, I mean, I don't know, as I study basically the past century, and what's funny is the Superman trailer got me thinking about this today because I'm a big Snyderverse fan, and Zack Snyder cult hell for basically for being Catholic and comparing Superman to Jesus. Like, how dare he, right? But all I could think as I was looking at that is like, well, all through the Western canon up until maybe 1960, you would have a Christ figure. You would have a direct Christ figure in your work. That was expected,
Mm-hmm.
and that just kind of got caught me off guard thinking about it and looking at it. It's like, well, if we're not being open to that, first of all, I don't know why as a Christian anyone would find that embarrassing to have a blatant Christian comparison. Then what is being open to? And I just got me thinking about it today as I was going to discuss this with you. It almost seemed too simple or stupid to say, but when you look at a culture's art, you see what spirits they are channeling. And I mean, when you look at art today, especially a lot of it, it's just overtly satanic, you know?
Yeah, and I would say over time, if you look at certain art styles and cartoon styles, was it Cal Arts, and things like that. So, like,
Yeah.
in my mind, if you look over time, you could actually see art itself becoming uglier and
Yeah.
uglier and uglier, and to the point where it was a story like, they tape a banana to the wall, and
Oh
you have a
yeah.
bunch of people taking pictures of it, and that gets into the like, anything is art. There's no like objective good or bad when it comes to art. And so I disagree with that. There's tastes, like people have different preferences and tastes, but there are certain objective standards that you sort of need to have, or it just evolves into nothing where you just have, what is it, piss Christ or whatever it was, you
Oh
have a
God,
Christ in a
yeah.
bottle of urine and people are calling it art, and you're just like, I mean, do you want to really go with that definition of art? Like, then it just becomes like, when everyone's like, oh, these days it's just a money laundering operation. And I'm just like, I do think there is a lot of truth to that,
Yeah.
because it really seems like a lot of the things that pass for art and go for hundreds of thousands of dollars in these auctions, we are just like, that's just a guy that just like splatted some rotten eggs up against the wall or whatever it is. And you're just like, that's not art.
Well, it seems like everything's a money laundering operation these days, but that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, like that's the thing is like, at what point do you? How can you look? Basically, how can you look yourself in the mirror and be like, "I'm an artist," and you know you didn't work for any skill. You know that you buy into this idea of that anyone can be an artist and that anything is art. Well, that means nothing is art, and I don't understand on a personal level how anyone could look at themselves in the mirror and live with that and be okay with that. And the other thing is like, is that what you? I don't know. Like, is that's the democratization of everything? It it pulls everything down to a horrific level where it's basically nothing. And the scary part about that is because we've talked, not you and I, but as a culture, particularly the anti woke kind of thing for the past 4 or 5 years, the culture war has focused so much on the tearing down of things, the degradation of things. Well, the only reason you tear things down is to build something up in its place.
Right.
So I think if it's not stopped now, or not stopped, but if it's not countered now, it's not just going to be tearing things down, it's going to be putting up horrific things.
Yeah, and well, I would even say this is off the top of my head, so I haven't unpacked this yet. But
Yeah.
as you were speaking, it just kind of like sort of came to me. So if you don't believe in any sort of like standards, and basically a lot of these artists, they seem to have quote unquote God complexes, and when you think you're just like perfect as is, and anything you literally throw and figuratively throw against the wall is like a masterpiece,
Yeah.
you're not going to push yourself to become better. Like you don't think that you need to do anything. So there's no stress. There's no, so all you can ultimately do is like tear down things and like get enjoyment or glee out of like the process of destruction, because building yourself up would require some sort of like self-evaluation and acknowledgement that there are flaws to what you're doing, and that you could there was the possibility that you could be better, you could strive to something that transcends yourself or something along those lines. But once you do away with any of those notions and essentially make yourself this little g god or demigod or whatever you want to call it, then there really is only destruction, because you're not going to build anything that would last anyway.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that because like that's actually something Josh, my artist, for people who don't know, and I have discussed about our own universe, is that the idea of no man can be God, and every day we try. I mean, that's what in the Christian sense, that's what sin is. That's a man trying to be God every day, every minute of every day. And if you can't, if you can't bring forth life, which you can't because you're not God, you only bring forth destruction. And what you just said, it, basically, we've eliminated hierarchy, and hierarchy is a terrible thing. And I remember I even had this discussion with a friend of mine because at the time he was like a male feminist, and he said, "Well, hierarchy breeds oppression." And it's like, well, it also breeds structure and order, and it breeds like all of civilization, everything you have. But we've demonized hierarchy, and when you do that, yeah, there's nothing to look up to.
Right.
And on the opposite end, which is what you just said, a very insightful thing, when there's no hierarchy that you can see up, you start thinking you're on top.
Right.
And then you start looking down at everything else as if, yeah, like it's the like Paradise Lost. Basically, you know, and the both of them, and the what I'm looking for, Inferno, the Divine Comedy.
Mhm.
Everything in hell is inverted. It's upside down. Satan at the lowest looks down and thinks he's on top.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of archetype.
Yeah, no, it's like you said, if there's not like a massive shift change in mentality, like I don't even know how it would even happen. I don't know. Like I said, I've over the decades, it just seems to me that the writing quality and everything has gotten worse. The
Mm-hmm.
art, there's always the standouts. There's always going to be people that are very talented, and the statistical outliers. But it seems that on the whole, the average has like slid down, and like IQ has gone down, and just I don't know, people's attention spans are not what they used to be. Their threshold for pain is not what it used to be.
We're
And maybe
fatter though. We're much fatter.
yeah, well, it's weird because we have a standard of living where these days it's very easy to with like empty calories and things like that become a bigger version of yourself.
Well, that's actually a fun distinction. Like as your like soul and everything rots away, the body gets bigger and fatter. And I'm sure some Gnostic would have a nice view of that, you know. Um, but yeah, but it's easy. Believe me, it must be easy because people have built careers off of it. And I don't want to get you in trouble, Doug. So I'm not. I don't want to get me in trouble either. But I do think we have seen the idea of complaining. Like I just know people like personally, all they do is complain and they can't create anything.
Mm.
And I do think that that goes hand in hand. I don't think the idea of the cynical artist, the nihilistic, too cool for school, drug addict artist, I don't think that's real. And the reason I don't is because look, we had the archetype. You're old enough to remember this. Kurt Cobain,
Mm-hmm.
the modern heroin chic artist, right? Even into his life and suicide. That guy, he had a crippling heroin addiction, but it only really became after he was successful. That dude spent like years perfecting his art.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever people think about it, he spent a long time dedicated to studying because we've seen his journals. That guy at least took his art seriously. The idea of the magic prodigy that just insults everything and then somehow puts out art that's good, that doesn't happen.
Right.
We've kind of believed that. I think that goes hand in hand with, I say all that to say you can only be so cynical. You can only insult things so much before someone looks at you and goes, well, you do it better. And I just know people that can't, and I never wanted to be that person.
Yeah, I mean that was I don't want to say, I don't know if it's a problem is the right word, but even with my YouTube channel, at some point in time, like with YouTube, if you're criticizing things, I felt personally, I said all the things that I needed to say.
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, well, I don't want to be a broken record for decades on end, just saying the same thing over and over again. It's Groundhog Day. And then I got into the realm where it was like, okay, well, now I'm creating. And I do feel like at some level, like, I don't want to say like you have to put up or shut up, but like, you either say what you had to say and it's like time to move on, and or like you start creating yourself. But if you are just constantly like your whole thing is like, I'm just going to complain every day, I'm going to be in an angry state of mind, like I think that's unhealthy.
Yeah, and I totally get discontent breeding creativity. Because I think every artist does have some kind of if you were satisfied with all the art you saw, you would just consume. You wouldn't want to make anything else, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the difference between getting sand in your craw and making a pearl and just stirring up a sandstorm for everybody else, you know?
Right.
So that does lead me into your books, if you don't mind. I found I kind of unlocked this idea when I was in school for music, and everything that is preached in music, at least modern music industry, is that your ideas, you should take your idea and you should whittle it down, and you should break off as many of them as possible and save them away and squirrel them away, because if you can have 4 ideas, well, that's 4 different things that'll basically bring you money. They treat creativity as if it's like a well that can run dry. I have found that creativity is something, it's more like a fire, and the more you feed it, the bigger it gets. So I say all that to say, man, you seem like you've put your head down and just produced work after work after work, and I commend you for that. But I wanted to find out, like, how do you, your headspace on that? Do you find that you're having things that you're just having to grab, or are you being able to focus one thing at a time and just lay it out and have a structure going? Like, what's your artistic journey feeling like right now? Now, that's kind of a feminine question, but
Yeah. Whenever I think we may have touched on this last time around.
Mm-hmm.
I basically try and find the themes or questions that are like uh, very interesting to me or personal. And then I will look for books that I haven't read before, or maybe I revisit old books. But for
Mm-hmm.
the most part, I'm looking for like new knowledge. And I'm just like always trying to read more and more and more, and then like highlighting books and underlying passages that make me think about things in a different way. Or I'm like, oh, that's interesting, I could explore that. So with Black Tide, the second book, that one needed a few more months. Like I'm ultimately happy with it, but I was so intent. Like I was like, I got to get the second book out within a year. And I feel like it could have baked for like a couple more months or something along those lines. But for the most part, I don't like to, like, I would not be good on a monthly Spider-Man book
Yeah.
or Daredevil book for the most part. It would be very difficult for me because I like to write, but it has to be something that's like inside me that I have to like it out. And it would be much harder for me to be like, hey, Doug, we need you to write a story on this. Can you do it? And I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
can do it. But unless I feel like it's, I don't know, like deep within my soul, like coming out, like for whatever reason, maybe it's because I'm older, I just don't want to do it. So so I do have all these different ideas that I'm exploring, but typically I'm like, okay, I can spend like 6 months to a year,
Mm-hmm.
like, reading books and doing research and thinking about stuff. But at some point in time, I gotta like pull the trigger on the idea and start going for it, because you can just ruminate on things forever and then you're just not going to get any work done. So for the most part, I like to just, I don't know, seriously think about things by myself on the road when I'm driving around, or if I'm just late at night by myself, reading books. Just, I don't know, like my wife's cool because she allows me to basically go into isolation for certain amounts of time to just like think about stuff. And that actually gets into, like, I think good artists and good writers, like, how do I say this, in the YouTube era, in the social media era, where it's like you always got to be talking to people and
Mm-hmm.
doing stuff. I actually think that's counterproductive to creativity. I think you basically have to be alone with your own thoughts and you have to confront them, and that helps out a lot.
Now, that was my next thing I wanted to talk to you about, because we briefly interacted with that on Twitter. I can't get used to calling it X, but to quote Orson Scott Card, who wrote Ender's Game. The main theme of that book was isolation breeds creativity, and that is so counter. Because I don't know about you, man. When I was going, especially in school, everything was collaboration. Everything is, even any art project, anything in school, anything anywhere where there were other people. Everything was beating your head about collaborating, and that always got on my nerves. And it wasn't just because I thought I was great. It was like, I don't want to bring down anybody else's work either with my stupidity. But the archetype, this is going back to kind of the Christian perspective, but you can separate that as well. The prophet is the one that's in the cave. The prophet, or in the example of Jesus, the greatest prophet, the desert.
Mm-hmm.
You go, you separate, you're alone, and usually that time is not very pleasant. It's, at least for the prophets, it's a lot of time of one-on-one with God. And again, talking about the good, the true, and the beautiful, when you meet those things, when you meet God, when you meet the true, the good, and the beautiful, you realize how untrue, ungood, and unbeautiful you are. And you see what I'm saying? Then you have to take all that, bring it in, and then you take it back to the city. Then you go back to the people.
And if you go to either doctors of the church or, very holy men, they will often say that God speaks in a still small voice,
Yeah.
or the language of God is silence, and all sorts of things along those lines. I think it was Cardinal Sarah said language of God is silence. But I have found that unless I'm completely delusional. But I have found that God really does speak in silence, and you have to basically block out the rest of the world in order to like feel. I don't even know how to explain it. But you have to basically be at peace.
Yeah.
uh, at least at peace enough to be alone with your own thoughts. So like I've always thought like a lot of people that they're always getting drunk and doing drugs and do all this sort of stuff. It's like they do that because they don't want to be alone with their own thoughts at night, because that going out to the club or going to bars and doing all that stuff, there's noise all over the place. You don't need to listen to both your own conscience or the still small voice of God that's telling you, hey, like you're not, you're on the wrong track, brother. Like not that guy God will say brother. But like I do believe that silence, yeah, maybe silence breeds creativity, as I think you were saying a few minutes ago.
Isolation, but yeah, it's the same thing, because that's the whole point of isolation, is silence. No, I mean, that's a whole esoteric idea, but I was thinking about that the other day actually, and it's not to just down cell phones, but there is something weird and very perverse about the modern world of always having information, always having a screen in your face, and something is always coming, especially with the idea that the eyes are the windows to the soul,
Mm-hmm.
and you're always feeding them something. And I don't know, like the the our ancestors, and I mean that in a global sense, they didn't map the stars by like focusing on a tablet. They did
Right.
it by going out at night and just gazing for hours and hours. And I can't imagine that kind of concentration it took. You'd have to look at it for like a ridiculous amount of time to notice the changes and the differences and map it all out. And that's just an example, but I don't know. I have a longing in my heart, especially for artists, Christian or not. And that's my challenge to a lot of people, is like, if you don't have that time where you just go be alone, and I find this to go back to the put on the Christian hat, I find that to be a powerful ministry tool. It's like, go see if truth is true. Go sit alone and like basically see if God is real.
Right.
That's a terrifying thought, man.
Yeah, when hopefully I didn't say this last stream,
I don't
but
remember
when
anything.
my wife was in school, there was a period of time where she was 400 miles away from me, and so we had a long distance marriage, and so if I wanted to see her, I had to do an 800-mile round trip. And there was a period of time where I was just like, I'm just going to start driving in complete silence.
Yeah.
Maybe people think like, wow, you're a psychopath. But I found that like I actually grew a lot as a person by being in total silence and just, I don't know, it forces you to think about your life and your priorities and where you're going and what you did wrong and the things that you need to be held accountable for, like both yourself and to God. Because if you're constantly, like you said, bombarded with noise and cell phones and virtual reality headsets and all this sort of stuff, you're not able to like really do that sort of self diagnostic exam on your soul and your mind. And I actually do think that that's what Satan wants, you preoccupied with everything except your soul. Because the longer that he could keep you preoccupied with like goofiness and white noise, that's what he likes.
I totally agree, and I don't think, and I'm not trying to get off base here, get a little touchy, but I do think there's probably a correlation between the amount of time that artists stream versus their output, or the time that they're on social media versus their output. And I don't even mean that versus time, like as in like 20 minutes that could have been this. I mean just what we're talking about, like your energy.
Right.
If you spend so much time outpouring, either out and yelling or typing, and being bombarded, both of those things weigh on your soul. Both of things just weigh and exhaust your brain and your eyes. And I don't know, man. But that's a whole structure. Let me pull this up real quick. This is Mr. X. So I certainly feel that struggle, Doug. Sometimes it can feel like pulling teeth despite wanting to create things. It's an odd feeling for sure.
Yeah, that's, it's like when you're looking at a blank white page, like it is daunting. So then you're always asking yourself, am I just procrastinating here?
Yeah.
Like it's gonna be hard to do it. So I have that thing where it's just like, all right, how much is me just like putting this off, and how much is it me feeling like, no, I still have to think about this longer before I dive in. But typically when I dive into a script, so the I don't know, again, I don't want to say problem, but when I start writing a script, my mind starts like racing. And for the duration of writing the script, I can't really sleep at night. I will wake up in the middle of the night and like my mind is just like constantly racing. So I don't get like any sleep. And if I don't know. So it'll be like a couple weeks or whatever it is, maybe 3 weeks or a month, where I'm basically, it just feels like, I don't know, it's overdrive in my brain. And then when I'm done with the script, I basically like go comatose and I'll sleep for like 18 hours or something like that, because it's my brain's like, okay, you could shut down. So I don't know. I have like a weird, everyone has their own kind of creative stuff, but I've found like it's almost, maybe I do put it off because I'm just like, dude, I know that my brain will just be like cycling so fast with all these ideas that it's, I don't want to say it's not a fun experience, but it is, but on some level it is not fun.
Yeah, and I think that is the mature slash professional artist ultimate challenge is to work when it's not fun.
Mm,
And but the other thing is like I kind of realized that maybe at 20 is like, do I want to be comfortable or do I want to make art?
mm,
And well, if I want to make art, it means getting up early and practicing. Because I mean, I studied music for a very long time before I started in comics. And if as you know, even writing, a skill is a skill, and if you don't keep it up, if you don't practice, you don't get at it, you're not good at it. So you make that. It's the same thing with working out that people do. It's you can be comfortable or you can be better.
mm.
And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to get over. And I believe me, I completely understand it because it never gets easier. Even when you get in a routine, especially as your ideas start coming out more and your projects get bigger or more professional or more widespread or more successful, you have to keep showing up. You can't
Right.
slack off. And again, I hate always making this comparison, but it's one reason I really love talking to you. I dig that Catholic idea. I really like that idea of discipline, of some kind of physical connection to the spiritual that is required of you in order for your own good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So with that idea, I would like to ask you, do you find whenever you're working on something that you've articulated something you didn't realize before? You've uncovered a truth that you didn't know before.
Yeah, well, I mean, that gets into like sometimes dreams.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing is when I'm writing, I will start having like crazy vivid dreams. And there's been times where, how do I say this? In my dreams, I will have some sort of epiphany or something where it's like that couldn't have come from just me,
Yeah.
because how do you like learn something you never knew before in a dream unless it was somehow like given to you? Like I know the subconscious is like its own ocean of bubbly thoughts and things come together or whatever,
Supposedly, yeah.
but there has been times where I have had a dream and like I wake up from the dream and I'm like, holy, like I've learned something new. This has actually changed the way I think about things on like a profound level. And so again, as we were talking about like earlier with being a conduit, I think that there are times where the finite of your heart or whatever touches the infinite that's breathing life into you every second of every day. And if you're attuned to it, or I guess, I mean, on some level, you might not even have any choice. Like you're going to get insights that are going to come out of it. But you, at the same time, again, you have to be seeking a relationship with living truth, living beauty, living goodness. and then maybe if you're paying close enough attention, you might hear a whisper back or something along those lines.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And like that was going to be my next point is do you find here's my thing. I've have these really weird purchasing habits now. I used to save money all the time. Like I was cheap as all get out. I lived very minimalistically. When I started working on comics and having to think, I've never had to think visually before because I'm a musician. I've never been a visual artist by any stretch of the imagination ever. But when I found myself having to come up with character designs to talk about with Josh or anything visual, I found that I started buying things more. I know I have these really weird kind of like urges. I'd be like, man, like, all right, I guess I'm gonna get into like Magic the Gathering now, or I guess I'm gonna get into like posters now. And I would find that when I would purchase these things, like I would buy like an action figure, I would have a new idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally decided, I was like, well, this is so counter to me. I'm so penny pinching. I'm so cheap that I'm just gonna dive into it a little bit. And I built up a stockpile of like Marvel and DC and Spawn figures and stuff like that and video games. I have all these video games here. I just purchased Zelda Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. And as soon as I get my hands on something like that, that weird aesthetic thing that I saw and I purchased, like as soon as it comes in the mail, I get it. I get some kind of new idea.
Right.
And I don't know how to explain that.
Yeah,
I'm not
no,
rambling.
I mean,
It's just,
it's weird for me because like sometimes when you listen to like new agey people and things like that, there's like the Catholic perspective and then there's the new agey perspective. But I could actually understand because how do I say this? Things come into your life for a reason. So if there's 8 billion people on the planet, I'm talking to you right now. What are the chances I would be talking to you right now? Like, and if God's will is constantly working in our lives and trying to give us opportunities to like, carry out his will, the people that are introduced to your life and the images that like stand out to you for whatever reason, like a stop sign or whatever, like, lights up, like I feel like there is, again, if you have the proper discernment, you'll be able to like glean the lessons that you need to learn in that given moment or get the message, or seeds are planted that need to, that you won't see the fruit of that seed for like 5 or 10 years. But every single person that you run across, in my mind, because like, I'm just like, no, like I was out of all the people in the world, I'm talking to you right now. And so I got to take it seriously because there are lessons that I need to learn right now, right this moment. And those are things that I'll think about, tonight and, for probably like weeks to come.
No, I think that's a wonderful idea. And like that's the thing is a lot of the new age idea of that is that you're on a journey, but you don't know where you're going. Whereas the Christian perspective is you're on a journey, but you know the ending. You know
Right.
who's there at the end. You do know the perfection. You may not understand it 100%, but you know there's an archetype, there is a goal, there is the author and perfecter of what you were supposed to be. And that's the main enjoyment I've found from creating is that interaction with other people. I mean, I got to tell you the story. We were at a horror con 2 or 3 months ago, which seems like a weird place to sell comics, but not really. I didn't realize like the massive female audience that horror like had. That was a little weird. I was like, man, I thought this was like a creepy, smelly dude thing, but not. But we met a guy there. I almost said kid. He's 21, 22, named Brody. He walked up to the table. He picked up our book. And he flipped through it, and he like got it instantly. And I was like, like how? And he's like, oh man, like this has some, esoteric. This has some Christian influence. This has some whatever influence. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did he do that for flipping through the pages? And we talked for like an hour or two, and he went and he read the entire book, like 180 something pages, and he came back and we talked for like an hour or two more at this convention, and it was mind blowing the things we had in common, especially since he's an atheist. But we connected discussing these kind of deeper ideas so much so that we exchanged numbers, and now he's writing a short story for one of our peripheral books that we're doing on our campaign now.
Hmm.
And it's something that never would have happened if we hadn't just somehow been selling a book we made at a horror convention in South Carolina.
Right.
And that's so weird, and like he was so into that. Like I said, he's not a Christian yet, but but just that weird way of connecting, whether you want to believe it's some kind of deep collective unconsciousness or serendipity, which is very strange and just so heart moving.
No, I totally agree. And that's, again, a situation for a Christian perspective. It's like, okay, you met this guy. He's an atheist. And I would say one of the reasons why you were meant to, maybe
Yeah.
you were the person who could articulate your faith in a way that would plant that seed that maybe 5 or 10 years from now will bear good fruit or whatnot. So I don't know. I definitely believe in that.
Oh yeah, I do too. And that's part of the great adventure, I think, especially of art. Well, from Christianity, of course, but in the arts, is I don't think that I think because art is the most primal means of communication, like symbols and sounds basically are the most primal means of communication. They're unbelievably important. And that's why something like the topic we're discussing the true, the good, and the beautiful is so important. I don't know. I could talk about this for like 6 hours and write a whole thesis on it. Just whether anyone believes in a God or not, there has to be something transcendental. It can't just be. I'm so over the idea of self-expression. You and I are roughly the same age, I think, Doug, and I know you probably grew up your whole life hearing self-expression preached. If we are materialistic clay, the only self-expression is like a defecation.
Right.
What are you expressing? What is the self,
No, there's been times, how do I say it? So I am a cradle Catholic, but my faith when I was a younger man, we'll just say it was in flux, or I drifted from the church or whatever. But at the same time, going back to music, there's been times where it's like a Prince guitar solo,
Oh, nice
or
name
like
drop.
there are certain individuals, David Bowie, whatever it is, you will listen to it, and it's different for everybody and their artists, but it's like it speaks to you at such a deep level that you're like, there's no way this existence is an accident.
Yeah.
Like there must be a higher power, because that guitar solo or that song that he created with those lyrics and his vocal range and the way he delivered it was so beautiful. Do not tell me that we are just like sentient, accidental bags of water that will then just drift into nothing. There must be a reason that we are here, because that is beautiful right there.
Yeah, that's what I'm so glad you name dropped Prince. Like that's the thing, man. Like you can't like watch the Purple Rain halftime show he did, like the Super Bowl.
In the rain.
Yeah, he calls it the rain for the first time at the Super Bowl performance ever. And then it stopped as soon as he stopped. Like, you gonna tell me that's an accident, man? It's like, come on, that's not some chaotic matter just lining up.
That was the greatest Super Bowl halftime performance of.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's probably been a couple
topped.
good ones, but I will occasionally just go back and I was like, it was Purple Rain in the rain. Like,
dancers didn't miss a beat. They're on like 4-inch heels somehow in the rain. Perfect. Just. Yeah, and I think that are you familiar with C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I'm glad we could do a whole 6-hour podcast just on that. But I mean, that's his whole thing, is like he saw the rise of subjectivity, as he called it. I think that's the term he used at the time for it in academia, and it hurt him so much that it was like a textbook that was describing a waterfall for students as like some may find it beautiful instead of it was just beautiful. And for those not familiar, he traced it down, and he did it way better than I could articulate, and than probably anyone could ever articulate. He was C.S. Lewis. That if you follow that idea to the end, you're going to have a whole generation of men without chests. And it's not just that they're not masculine or not buff, it's that they don't have heart. They can't appreciate beauty and truth and goodness when they see it. They don't know it exists.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that gets me thinking of when I was a kid. We would pack in everyone in the van and we would drive out west. We go to Colorado to go skiing.
Yeah.
And I remember going up, we're in the Rockies. It was either Steamboat or Vail or one of those, I don't know. And I was able to just go off by myself because I was a better skier than everybody else, even though I was like, 14, 15 years old. They let me go anywhere. So I was going to the Double Black Diamonds or whatever. And at some point in time, it gets so high and so quiet. It's like you could hear your own heartbeat. But it was like complete silence, and you just hear like the tick of the snow on you, and you're so high up, and it's so beautiful. Again, that's something where it's just like, no, there's like a part of God that is like touching you and letting you know, like, hey, I'm real. Like this beauty that you are experiencing and it's touching you at such a deep level right now. Like, keep going down this path because you will find me. You'll be able to have a conversation with me. But this is just my introduction to you, is this beautiful landscape, high, crazy altitude silence. It's just you and me and the snow and your heartbeat.
Yeah, and it's like that. You can't, especially like with the idea of beauty. Someone would say that if you found like a woman, or if a woman found a man attractive, as, oh, that's some kind of biological urge to breed. Well, it's like, well, why is there a biological urge to breed? Or the cells in your body, are they so godlike that they compel you as a unit, as a comprised unit, to continue on? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And then for what purpose? Oh, to just exist? Well, what is existence? What is life? What's the point? But if you chase that, you could even believe that. You could believe in a completely materialist idea of that. But then you'd have to come up with, like, what's the purpose? And then that would lead you to something like, oh, beauty or rational truth, like reason. There's wiser men than us in the church have already written entire tomes on this idea, I know. But it at some point, especially in the modern world, man, like you have to stop. And like you just said, you have to find that moment that you almost find accidentally where you touch the eternal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what humility is, I think. Humility is just realizing that basically you're not God and that God is there.
Right.
And it's just, humility is just the natural state of whenever you're confronted with that.
Yeah, and how do I say this? Again, if you're atheist co-writer or your peer or artist or whatever is watching, I apologize. Like these conversations get iffy for me. But to me, those are the instances where I'm just like, how can you come face to face with, whether it's lyrically or musically or just visually through nature, some of these things that are just so awe-inspiring, and then ultimately be like, it's an accident, or something like that. Like, I'm just like, my brain doesn't register that, because it's just like, no, there must be like, or else existence is just cosmically stupid. Like, and I refuse to believe like that is the case. I just refuse to believe it.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is, and I know in the 80s and 90s, the super postmodernists, and then the, oh goodness, like the new sincerity movement, this idea of like, yeah, you just like laugh at the absurdity of it all. And it's like, okay, how long does that get you?
Right.
Like, and to what end? To laugh at what and just die and not accept it? It seems like a cop out. Everything, I'm not trying to evangelize here, but everything except for some kind of transcendence seems like a cop out.
Right.
We know, like, it does not make sense for human beings to consistently organize themselves around these archetypes, or around these sites, or around these ideas over and over and over and over again, all throughout all of history, and will always happen. We're not going to reach some magical utopia where we're not in awe by things greater than us. We're not going to figure out, we're not going to quantify every little thing that exists ever. It seems like the better thing to do is just admit that you're at least not the sole creator and proprietor of the universe.
Yeah, and to me, I don't know if it was, maybe it was Lewis, maybe it was Chester. I don't know who it was, but one of these guys, they were basically saying, like, if you have an urge for something, whether it's like I have to eat, I have to breathe, or procreate, or whatever, anything that is like so deeply ingrained in you that like there's always a reason for it. So
Yeah.
therefore, like the search for meaning in life, like all humans have this like innate desire to figure out the meaning of life or whatever. So if it's anything like, having to eat or procreate or even breathe, like there is a reason for it because there is a meaning and you are supposed to actually find that meaning.
Yeah, and like even from a superficial standpoint, what a wonderful adventurous idea that is, as opposed to we're mud and we're gonna be mud forever.
Right.
And no one believes that. No one, whenever they're sitting alone, unless it's horrifically either oppressed or beaten down person, sits and thinks that about themselves in the universe.
Right.
Especially if you're starving, you don't think, "Oh, I'm just mud and I'm going back to dirt." You can't curse God. You can't yell at God. You can't find an injustice if there's not some kind of justice. And if there's not justice, there's not a purpose.
Right.
And I forgot who did that. Man. Maybe that was Lewis. I think it was again, the justice versus injustice idea. How could you imagine there's an injustice if you can't imagine that there's a justice? So it seems, I don't know, man. I'm never repeating it again, but I just have a heart for that, especially artists. And it's like, man, if you're not, I'm not pushing someone, I'm not trying to evangelize, like I said, but if you're not seeking that silence, if you're not seeking good, true, and beautiful, and learning what those words mean, and really sitting and thinking, well, what is truth? I don't know what to tell you. Like you want to create for something,
Right.
and if you can't answer that question, even the creative process isn't going to help you because that's just an act of trying to reach something that's there. But if you don't know what's there, you're not going to be able to reach for it.
Yeah, no, if I was an atheist and it would feel like I was a hamster on a wheel. Like what is the point? Why am I even doing this if there is no point? Like but if the point is to let my creator know that I'm trying my best to properly love him and I don't know, give glory to him and thanks for everything that he's given me. Like I just feel like that is something that can sustain you throughout life into your old age. I will be 85 years old trying to think if there's like I still have time to write a story to get maybe if Matt Weldon is like too old to like do the book, I'll be like, it looks like I got to do a short story now or something along those lines. But I feel like that is something that can something that can sustain you until your dying breath.
Well, and not to get off topic and not to get too personal on him, but is Matt Weldon your consistent artist
So
for your
Matt's been
books?
on 2, 3, 4, and 5 of Soul Finder. I think he's on board for volume 6, but I never want,
Yeah,
Matt's busy guy. So he was doing like the Final Fight stuff, and people are always
really.
asking him to do all
He's
sorts of
he's a wonderful
things.
artist.
So my job is to basically create an environment where Matt wants to keep working with me. And if I'm being a good friend and if I'm being a good collaborator, I think we could have, I mean, we've already had a good ride together as far as it's gone, but like, I always look at it like surfing and waves, whether it's like my job or, creatively, you're surfing out there and and if this is a cool wave, I want this wave to last as long as possible. And so working with Matt has been awesome. And so I will ride that wave with Matt as long as possible.
Oh, I totally get that, man. I mean, Josh and I are basically best friends. We've known each other for 10, 15 years, and we both co-own the Godful universe. But you still like I still got to make this guy happy. I got to still make it cool for him to work with you. That speaks to my ignorance. I wasn't sure who did all your books. Matt Weldon. Is he a Christian as well?
Matt is Latter-day Saints. He grew.
Okay,
Well, I
cool.
don't know how much I want to I'd say,
Yeah,
but like,
if it's personal, private info,
no,
that's
but
fine.
he's
Yeah,
like, yeah. So Tim did the first book with me, but then
yeah.
Tim, as you know, has Black Ops and Common America, and they have all sorts of other stuff.
He's a little busy.
Yeah, so he at the time he was like, "Hey, listen, I got all this stuff going on, but I know a guy named Matt. I think you guys would hit it off." And so I went down to Texas, and I had like lunch or dinner, or I don't know. I had some meal with all the guys, and talked to Matt. And yeah, so Matt is a man of faith, and I think I may have said this before, but he is one of the kindest, if not the kindest, men I've ever met in my life. And so he has actually made me a better person working with him. So I want to be around guys that make me better, creatively, professionally, spiritually. And Matt does that. And so, yeah, we've just had like a great working relationship.
I get that, man. It's basically, and what you just said, that's actually what I wanted and talked about and prayed for when I started music. Was like I always wanted to be in bands or be surrounded by people who were better than me, like
Mm-hmm.
in every way. I mean, and man, when that comes true, that's a humbling thing. It's like, this person is better than me at what I feel like everything, every part of life. But you definitely need that in every aspect of your life because it's so easy to get comfortable, man. And in art, in skill, and basically just being a human being is so easy to get comfortable. And the unfortunate truth is that comfort kills, especially men. I mean, that's what I watched my dad basically retire and just melt away. And I feel like that's probably the worst thing for men is to not have something to do and not have something to put your mind to. Used to be idle hands at the devil's playground. I mean, sometimes that playground is basically just wasting away.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think men in particular need to have something going, whatever it is. And like you said, finding ways to basically humble yourself. So if you follow my feed, like
Mm-hmm.
I like to force humility on myself through exercise. I've exercised since I was a kid, but it's something where you can put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, because it's when you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, that's when you learn a lot about yourself. And you have those breakthroughs that you were mentioning earlier about any number of things. So whether it's physically or mentally or spiritually, I feel like you have to work those muscles to exhaustion in order to grow as a person.
Yeah, and like I got that idea artistically from faith. Like when I grew up, not to go down the rabbit hole too much, I grew up in a Pentecostal house, um, and my mom and dad, parents were great. They were wonderful examples of Christ, probably the two best people on the planet you'd ever meet. But maybe I'm a little biased, and I thought I knew Christ, and then I actually had that realization and actually met Christ when I was 22. And of course, everything kind of changes in your head. But I realized that all the questions I had and all the like doubts or concerns, especially questions, were welcomed, and that if you worship a God who can't answer those questions, then that's not a God at all.
Right.
But that's an uncomfortableness that you have to be accepted with, and that's the thing I learned and was able to transfer to art. It's like, man, you're always needing to step into the unknown, and you're always having to step over basically the chaos to get to order. On if you want, if you want to make it a little Sunday school, walking on water. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The, and that's the same. Like, I know that's the idea with physical training is you want to consistently surprise your muscles and shock them, and it's the same thing with art and same thing creativity. And I think your faith is if you aren't looking for something that puts you in that place you aren't sure of, then you're relying on your own strength and you're not exploring at all.
No, we're definitely on the same page with that one, man. So I don't know. I don't know where I could take that one, so I'll
Yeah.
let you like sort of like give the bridge. Because
Yeah,
I could go in 10,000 directions.
I could too, and that's what's so funny. It's like it makes like reaching a wall. You're like, man, that's a pretty big concept to go into. I'll do this then. If you've got the time for it, I'll go down to this kind of idea. This is to tie this in with the serendipitous idea and with work. So I had this kind of idea of I was reading Job, and near the end, when God's giving Job a real nice lashing and telling him who he is and setting him straight. And for the uninitiated, God comes down to Job and he's telling him, he says, gird yourself like a man. I'm going to tell you who I am, basically. And God does this, and I may have mentioned this in the last one, I don't remember, but he gives this wonderful picture of what he calls the Leviathan, which is this massive water beast. This we sometimes you picture it as a dragon, or a giant fish of some kind. And God says, look how basically perfect in design it is, and how strong it is, and how it causes so much chaos. Who can wrangle it? Who can subdue it and put a ring through its nose? And that's a mark of ownership back in the day. Even people see it with cows. And it hit me that is, and it's not just this, but it hit me that that's the creative process. It is wrangling this massive chaotic thing, this powerful thing, without destroying it. You do master it, and you put a ring in its nose, and that's the whole thing, is that you've got it under control. You've brought chaos into order, and you can show it off, and it exists, and it's thriving, it's big. And I know the comparisons to Leviathan and Satan. I'm not making that comparison, but I say all that to say I had that realization, and that was years ago. And then at that same horror con where I met Brody, there was this girl there. I say girl, she's probably in her 30s, named Caroline. Let me get her card. I'll actually promote her real quick. I'll find it later. I forgot her last name, but I bought some of her pieces up here. And one of the pieces, the first piece I saw when I rounded the corner, she had these wonderful digital art. She has a woman with very long hair, and she's got a leash, like a chain, and it's going up to the nose of this serpent that sits behind her, and it's like subdued, and it's like listening to her. And on first appearance, you would think that that's like an esoteric or a cultish idea. But when you look at it, it's just that weird nature, that idea of mastering art or even mastering chaos just hit me so hard. I was like, yeah, like that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be so in line with the true, the good, and the beautiful that you aren't God, of course, but you take on the aspect of God that creates, which is the mastering of chaos into order.
Yeah, and the things that you make, your own little Frankensteins or whatever you want to call it, you are creating something that on some level, I don't want to say has a mind of its own,
Yeah.
but once you put it out into the world, it's going to affect other people. It's going to get its hands on them and shape them. So that's where the responsibility comes in as a creator, because if you're telling stories that go out there and march over to somebody and whisper in their ear and warp their mind and their spirit and stuff like that, you thought you could control it. No, you can't, because it goes out into the world and it affects people.
Yeah.
So like,
and it
you
keeps going.
Yeah. And it keeps going on and on and on longer than the ripples in the pool or pond or whatever, that you're creating a rock, basically you're throwing it and you think that it's not going to have a ripple effect, but it actually ripples in people's minds long after you are gone. So again, from a Christian perspective, you want to make sure that the thing that you're creating is a good beast or a good robot, whatever you want to call it, because if you create something that's bad, it's going to pervert people.
Yeah, and that, to tie it with religion, that was the Jewish idea of the golem. And
I don't mean to laugh, but just my own. Yeah, I don't want to get into that. So there's all sorts of cultist sort of thing with the golem. So anyway.
Oh yeah. Well, no, and that's the thing, is I know that's the idea of, like, it's kind of based on the intention of the one who built it, and it could be for good and protection, or it could be for evil and destruction. Mainly, I was introduced to it from some 1950s horror movie called The Golem that scared me as a kid.
Yeah, no, they were actually very creepy.
Yeah, that one was weird. Sorry. But and whoever is watching or is going to watch this, I shared that artist. I found her. Her name is Caroline Burgeon. Wonderful digital artist. I own 3 or 4 of her pieces. I'm gonna give her a shout out. I wanted to have her on the show. I need to reach out and send an email. But no, like that's the thing, man. And the thing with art is what you kind of just touched on, the burden of the artist. And I think that's another thing, of course, in our modern culture where we don't take responsibility for anything. But if you are communicating in art, which is so visceral and so powerful and so primal in a good sense, that's a big responsibility because you're communicating something to people that can touch them in a way that they won't even realize.
Right.
And that's why I've always held to this idea of if it's good for children, it's good for adults. And the same isn't in reverse, but if something is made for children, I think it should be made with the utmost respect and the guidance of of shaping that child into what they should be.
Yeah, a lot of people act as if children's stories and movies, they can just be mindless entertainment, or you don't need to put effort into it because it's just for kids.
Yeah,
And I'm just like, no, actually, it's the exact opposite.
exactly.
Their minds are little sponges, and they're constantly absorbing the world at an age where that's molding them. So you don't want to just give them mindless entertainment, and you don't want to just like slop things together and throw it at them. You probably should, it has to be at their level, obviously, but it should be good and wholesome entertainment.
Yeah, and that's harder to do. It's harder to distill good ideas and grand ideas into something for a child to understand. Like, but I've got 2 of them, and I'm trying to explain the Trinity to my 4-year-old. Good luck. But no, like if I think that's a wonderful idea and a wonderful skill and I think if you can learn to make art for children, that is good. You can probably make art for anybody, anywhere, anytime. If you can master that way of storytelling that is wholesome and good, and I don't mean corny and lame, I mean wholesome and good, you can make it in a way that benefits the world. And that's a big claim, I know, but you see this even when writing that's classical. You see it in Dostoevsky, you see it in even in Orwell, you see it in basically almost everything up until like the more modern era. It's they understood that at least some kind like art was good for the soul. That's what I'm trying
Right.
to get to. And you didn't have to have, I'm not going to get into that whole debate, but you didn't have to have like the F word every sentence. And that's just an example I'm giving. You don't have to be lewd.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the best I've noticed, how do I say this? The best stories for kids when I was growing up, some of the old Disney stuff. My parents could sit through that, and it seemed like they actually really enjoyed themselves. But then there was other stuff that they took us to, and you remember them coming out of the theater like, I wanted to shoot myself. Like, I can't believe I had to sit through that, whatever it was. And so I agree with you that like if it's something like, I don't know, like a Pinocchio or whatever, a lot of those old cartoons, it's like, no, kids could watch them, but they were just as packed with meaning, and they were done with such like care, that even adults can enjoy them.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a new thing, especially when you look at fairy tales and stories back in the day. It's in classical myths. It seemed like that was understood, and getting into a whole thing here, especially with society, but societies used to understand that to have a society, you had to have stories that were good for it, and ergo, they had to be good for everyone in it.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of entered, and this is getting into kind of the culture war idea, which I do think some of that is valid. I think their massive academic subversion is an undeniable fact from the Frankfurt School and communist infiltration and that kind of thing. We have atomized people and groups into identity groups. And yeah, identity politics. We separate children, teenagers, adults from each other, and then we created art for them based on that kind of idea of separation from all of society as a whole. And I think that's where a lot of problems came from.
Yeah, no, it's a shame that with the quote unquote culture war stuff that how do I say it? It's like the extreme elements on both sides of it, on both sides of it, have made it where a lot of people are just like, I don't even want anything to do with it. It doesn't, like, I wash my hands of all you, like pox on all your house sort of situation where he was like, no, actually, there is always a battle for your mind and your soul going on, and it is very important, and you should take it seriously. But there are people that know that they can make money off of red meat content for both sides of the debate. And it just stinks because I see some of these YouTube channels and the thumbnails that they use, and it's always geared towards just like the lizard brain sort of reaction, emotional reaction. I'm just like, you're making it bad for everybody, because there actually are serious intellectual arguments that need to be talked about and discussed with people, but you've turned it into just like a freak show. So thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Yeah, how many times can I see Civil War in red letters on a black
Yeah.
background? Well, it's something like talking about Lewis or Tolkien, those kind of guys that lived through war, or at least Tolkien did, and guys like Lewis that were in academia and saw this happening and saw it coming. They attacked it and they approached it, but they did it with dignity.
Right.
And they did it with civility, and they did it arguing in a way that brought it to the proper level. It exposed the ideas, and they held it to an academic standard. They weren't, the point you just kind of made, they weren't throwing red meat out at people. They weren't raising the general anxiety of the public. They were saying we can be adults about how we confront this. And that's what I genuinely believe, especially the creation of art. Art is important. And I do believe there's a culture war. And I'm not saying that the way we've heard it in the past 8 or 9 years, I do believe it is a spiritual battle. And I think people are realizing that, whether they're Christians or not, like something moves behind ideas,
Right.
and ideas move people. And it used to, I know, like, on the right wing, they used to say this idea. I forgot who said it. I don't know if it was Breitbart or one of those guys that said, what is it called? Culture or politics is downstream from culture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, religion is upstream from culture. Culture is downstream from religion.
Right.
And religion can mean ideology. Religion is just whatever you believe is your moral system for good or bad. And if we have a moral system for the past 80 years or so that all ideas are valid, everything is equitable, there's no hierarchy of good, true, or beautiful, all that can do is destroy. All that can do is tear down, like we talked about earlier.
And if there is a culture war, kind of getting back to the good, true, and beautiful, that's a way that you can speak to somebody. Like, how do I say it? If you can get a shadow of God to speak to somebody, God is a far more powerful negotiator or debater than you will ever be. So, I can fire up a live stream and I can tell people all day all sorts of arguments about blah, 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 blah. And you were talking about Frankfurt School, blah, blah, blah. Or like we were talking about whether it was Prince or whatever, if I could do a guitar solo and the lyrics like totally just speak to you at the deepest of levels, that could influence you far more than me just like sort of berating you and telling you to, hey, you got to read this website and you got to look at that guy and this academic and Jordan Peterson says that. And sometimes the best thing is just a good story that conveys it in ways that are beyond your comprehension. Even though you're the creator, but it's still something is operating above your own level.
Yeah, well, and to put it in, I guess, like simpler term, not simpler, but different terms, is the philosopher versus the shaman or versus the prophet. Like, and that is actually a biblical thing too. Like the intellectual Pharaoh's mages versus Moses. And I think that because that's the thing. I see what you're saying, and I understand. Like I know that circle of the internet where it's all usually intellectual babble. It's you
Right.
and intellectual battle. And I've seen people, especially more the right wing guys, be like, "We got to make art. We got to make art." It's like, well, dude, you don't make art by starting at a political stance.
Right.
That's how you make propaganda. You make art by what we're talking about. You go into the cave, you go into the desert, you find what is true. You don't start with what you think is true. You explore it. And that's not in the hippie sense of whatever, man, everything's true. It's like, no, you go find what is true. You go wait for the bolt of lightning of inspiration to hit you. And then you explore it. Then you hammer it down. Then you look at it more and more and more. And then you work it out through the art. You let it become incarnate. And that's, I could talk with you for 6 hours,
Well,
man.
the other thing that's kind of interesting, I got to be careful how I say this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to just be objective here. I'm not trying to be like weird about it. But I have noticed that a lot of people that are all about the quote unquote culture war, they will actually not promote real artists who agree with them on politics or maybe vote the same way, because I think when they see legit art that does transcend their own politics,
Oh,
they
yeah.
don't want actually anything to do with that. So they say they want like art, but when they actually get it, they're like, oh no, like you said, they want propaganda. They don't want art, because true art, the real truth and the real goodness, would actually take you away from them, and it wouldn't put you in. They want you in a little box, a little partisan box where you
Mm-hmm.
always do what they want you to do. But if you're actually producing real legit art, it will take you outside of a box, and they don't want to promote you if you are not in their little their tribal camp.
That's exactly the point, man. I need to come up with a better term, and I only know this because I had a discussion with Isaac Young. He's a Catholic writer as well, and we were discussing the idea of Christianity is subversive to the established order of the world, and he took offense. And I'm not degrading him. He had a good point, but he took offense with using the term subversive. So I like to use the term kind of like punk. But that's the thing is like if when you chase art, when you chase the true and the good and the beautiful, it is not bound to political ideology,
Right.
and it is not bound to the ideas of man. And that's what makes it scary, and that's what makes it that's what makes it fire. That's what makes purple rain, and why people love it. It's dangerous.
And I would say I get where he's coming from,
Mhm.
but if you are a Christian, you are behind enemy lines. Like this
Yeah.
life, this world. So on some level, you are going to be subversive if
Oh
you
yeah.
are a Christian and you try to be a warrior for Christ. Um, I would argue there's nothing wrong with being subversive if you are truly being subversive for the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Yeah. And that's it's a I can see it in my head the thought I'm trying to articulate. And I hate to use this example so much, but she did such a good job of it. Um, Anne Rand's book Anthem, where whoever haven't hasn't read it yet, it takes place in a fictional future, dystopian future where names don't exist. Basically, the communist dream has come true. Individuality doesn't exist. It's we, and one of the major themes is that the main character discovers the word I, and he can articulate himself, and then he discovers that he can build a light bulb, and everyone hates him. Like he takes it to the grand masters, and their greatest build ever was the torch.
Mm.
And her work gets Luciferian by the end. I get it, but that idea, it's such a punk rock book. It's such a subversive book because it does say, yeah, there is an entire idea, like that idea of experts knowing everything, or people in power trying to keep art against their own political idea. You have to push against it, and it's terrifying and it's horrific, and it is the idea of the archetype of the prophet, like we were discussing earlier. And I don't know I don't know. I hate to say this, man. I don't know what else to do as an artist other than basically buck the rules, like
Right.
in pursuit of what is true and good and beautiful. And it if you're gonna do that, you're gonna piss a lot of people off. I don't think I have to tell you that.
Yeah, no, like I was saying, if you actually try your best to pursue art and the good and the true and the beautiful, you will constantly butt heads with people because, like I said, they want to put you into political boxes, they want to put you into spiritual boxes, they want to put you into little tribal camps. And if you don't fit in that, then either they're going to try and destroy you or they're going to try and erase you and ignore you so you don't exist.
Yeah, and it's terrible and sad, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to speak for you about it, but I kind of picked up on that a little bit from our talk with you. Like I said, when I mentioned that you kind of, it seems like you put your head down and create it, and it seems like that's, and I know it from my instinct. I'm not trying to speak for you, but I say I picked up on that. I think of the kindred idea. It's very isolating. It when you really want to make art, it is unbelievably isolating because you can't sacrifice it basically for friendship,
Right.
and that's a hard lesson I had to learn. Like I lost friends over, I'd say political stuff but mostly it was this idea. It was mostly pursuing truth. And that's what really irritates me. Some of the stuff we're talking about, like kind of like political talking heads, is they can articulate all day of, oh, people don't want to talk to me because of my political views. Like, well, I know you don't want to talk to me because of my artistic and religious views.
Right.
You won't give up your political views for something greater.
Yeah, and the thing with a lot of the YouTube stuff and social media and even cable news and all of that, if you are an artist in the sense that we are talking about it,
Mm-hmm.
you will not be predictable at all. Like they want people on the shows. The producers want people where they know what you're going to say. There's a very narrow range of thought that they want you to touch upon. But the second that you are a wild card, then they're just like, no, 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 well, that's too dangerous. We don't know what that guy's going to say. So it's just safer just to not send the invite his way because you never know what he's going to say. Basically, they want puppets.
Yeah, that's the. I'm not trying to shield, but that's something we poured into our work and our story because there's a material called metal, and people can basically control the people through it. And that's an allegory we have of people trying to be God, and that's the whole thing. Is like that's the sad state of the world. Is people tend to form tribes, particularly when there's money involved, and it's all about control. It's all about, and I know I'm jumping around. The election, of Trump. It to me it at least the positive. It at least showed American dynamism can still exist.
Mm.
And that used to be, I know I'm stepping off, kind of going now into a history and more nationalist view of things, but that used to be part of our heritage was American dynamism, the pioneering spirit.
Right.
And that's been beaten down and stripped of us for the past 80 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, you could get into the sort of alliance or whatever you want to say between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, two billionaires, entrepreneurial guys in their own rights, in their own fields, but very interesting that at this point in time in history, after years of a very different message, people have sort of, I don't know, like they found it once again or rediscovered that like, hey, no, actually there is something to the entrepreneurial spirit, and maybe we shouldn't constantly beat down people that are trying to ignite that within individuals.
Yeah, and that's a great way to put it. That's does it? I just kind of came to the realization because like that election, man, just set me off, particularly against the progressive Christians I saw just like mommy nagging everybody, who voted for Trump. It's this idea of do we have to always live in a slow, controlled demolition, or can things be built?
Right.
Whatever. anyone thinks of the Trump administration, I say this, at least it's a chance to do something. And I don't think the world is. I think we've choked out that basically that masculine energy.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the Joe Rogan podcast with Donald Trump, the
Hmm.
thing that it was probably boring to most people, but I thought the most interesting thing was when he was talking about concrete and building and getting like around all the red tape and all the
Hmm.
inspectors that could come in. And if your concrete is off by, it's supposed to be like 10 feet and a certain amount of weight, but if you're off by like a half an inch,
Yep.
they can tell you got to tear it all down and start all over again, but that will cost tens of millions of dollars. And he was talking about how he had to navigate all these different mazes, bureaucratic mazes, to be able to build the things that he wanted to build around the world, in the New York City and down in, I don't know if it was like Louisiana, but it was down south and
Yeah.
wherever else he's building all this other stuff. And I'm like, no, that's a guy who's been tested and he literally builds things. And like you're saying, then he gets with Elon Musk, who is building rocket ships that literally are redefining what is possible in terms of getting into space and reusing rockets and all this sort of stuff. It's like, no, that resonates with people on a deep level, because they're like, if that's in my own life at my own level, I don't care about building rockets, but I do care about creatively building rockets or something along those
Yeah.
lines with the stories that I write. I want to have the same sort of impact creatively that Elon has, on a scientific level with his rockets, or Donald Trump has in um, you know, uh, the field of, why can't I think of it? Like the I don't know, the building,
Yeah. Real estate. Yeah.
real estate and all those sorts of things.
No, it's funny you mentioned that because I watched that whole thing. And first of all, I was like, first of all, how is this guy that's like 80 or whatever sitting here for like 3 hours? I can't sit still for like 3 hours.
Right.
And second, what struck me was he used that term. He said, I'm a builder. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's how he views himself. And that was profound for me. I was like, that was a genuine thing that this guy said. He's like, no, this dude loves to build things. And what you said, he will go through all the red tape, jump through all the hoops, learn to navigate, learn to be at the top of his game to do that thing he likes to do.
Right.
And I was like, man, when's the last time you saw anything like that on an American stage?
And even though people don't like his delivery of things, I look at him in the sense that if you are going up against this, speaking of Leviathan, the administrative state Leviathan that is Washington, D.C.,
Mm.
and the federal government, sometimes you need to send guys who are rough around the edges to deal with a Leviathan. It's just like, people look at infantry guys as sometimes you got to send bad dudes.
Yep.
Not that, speaking as a former infantryman, like guys who are rough around the edges to do jobs that nobody else wants to do. And so in my mind, if you want to send somebody to take on what Washington, D.C. has become, you're not going to get somebody that's going to be flowery and polite and kind and this sort of thing. It's kind of logically going to be someone along the lines of a Donald Trump or even an Elon Musk, who can be very blunt with the truth in ways that irritate people.
Yeah, and but that's the thing is, I'm not trying to get into like a Jungian archetype idea thing, but and I hate to use these terms because I feel like they're blunt, but we haven't had masculine power. It feels so strange because I had a great dad. I've seen that. I know what a man can do, and I know we live in a culture where men and women are exactly the same forever, right? But I'm talking to a Catholic here. Feminine, of course, and masculine power. You guys have basically defined it for the Western world, and that's what I think has been lost. Because if you can define masculine power, such as building, creativity, dynamism, then you can also define feminine power. And I feel like those things have been so lost. And I feel like maybe now we have the sliver of a chance to do it. And what you were saying, maybe it takes a guy who's a little rough around the edges. But that's what you need whenever you're getting trampled on basically by a nagging nanny state over and over and over. I'm not going to speak for you, but I mean, I have 2 kids. I had to do it this morning. I've got a 4-year-old girl. She wouldn't listen. She was throwing a fit. I had to switch to dad voice instantly. Attitude adjustment. Everything's fine. She's an angel.
Right.
And that is, it wasn't being mean. It's just like establishing authority and establishing boundaries. And you have to have that. Otherwise, it's just chaos.
And there are some people that just do not honor boundaries, and the
Mm-mm.
only thing that they really will respect is when you do project that
Yeah.
authority and masculine energy, and especially Washington D.C., filled with lawyers, filled with lobbyists, filled with sociopath politicians, people that literally they do not care about, they're only in it for themselves, and they don't respect boundaries. So yeah, you're not going to get someone who's just a nice little, you know, Sunday school teacher. Say, hey, like guys, like let's all do the right thing. And it's like, no, they don't care about the right thing.
Yeah.
So you need someone like a Donald Trump who's been in negotiating rooms with really hard-nosed individuals. And he's found a way to be able to get the job done in a room with people that are, quite frankly, nasty individuals.
No, and that's the thing, man. And like, I'm not trying to cross too many boundaries here, but that's my realization when I was kind of arguing or disagreeing with some of the more progressive Christians that were just lamenting and tearing their robes over this election. It's like, it's not. And of course, I know I keep making the distinction between Protestant and Christian and Catholic, but these were mostly Protestant guys, and I had to explain, like, most of Christianity, Christians were like instructed to pray for like a good king, right? Like, or at least someone that wasn't out there that hated them. And start with that. Start with this idea of someone that is at least competent and is at least like. Here's the thing: wars, like things like the Russia Ukraine stuff. I'm not just using that example. Wars can be ended in a day by two men talking to each other.
Right.
We like to pretend, and I don't need to tell you this. You were in the military. We like to pretend that we have to have forever wars that can't ever be solved. And it's like, no, military action can be solved instantly with guys at the top, such as our president and another president sitting down and talking for a day. They can end it like that.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is with Trump is a lot of people take issue with what he says, what he tweets, but I like to look at the what he does. And so in my mind, and again, you could go back to real estate days, this is somebody that has shown an ability to create things, giant monuments around the world, going through all sorts of the same exact red tape that you find in Washington, D.C. It's just a different variety. It's the political red tape. But like you said, yeah, if I don't care if somebody is like uncouth. I mean, I care, but I ultimately don't care if he's uncouth. But at the same time, he knows how to deal with like a Vladimir Putin and to end a war.
Yeah.
I would rather a war end and him tweet, memes about Chris Christie getting McDonald's
Or Diet Coke.
yeah, Diet Coke deliveries, then like I gotta prioritize ending the war over the niceties of memes.
Yeah, and we've lived in that kind of fog of, and I'm going to tie this all together. Give me a second. So I found very quickly in the music scene that, and it's the same with indie comics, a lot of guys that will praise you in the back room will talk smack about you in the next room, over and over and over. And that's very feminine. That's a toxic feminine. It's not, godly feminine. But I feel like our whole society and the whole world society has lived like this. It's probably like World War II. It's everything is always like a smiling, shiny tyranny
Yeah.
and a bureaucracy. When it used to be like, like I said, I'd much rather have an uncouth guy that's kind of loud and kind of says mean things that isn't, trying to destroy my family's future.
Yeah, most politicians, they are little fork-tongued devils. They sound sweet, like they might be a great orator,
Yeah.
but why does that matter if what they're saying is like dishonest and basically evil? Someone like Trump, again, I would rather have somebody that is just very blunt and maybe doesn't care about hurting your feelings, and sometimes he says things in kind of clumsy way, but ultimately there's a truth to what he is saying, that when he follows his policies, lead to things that are better for the country overall than they would be listening to someone who's just sweetly whispering dishonest things in your ear.
And I think that all goes together, man. I think that's kind of a to inside baseball. I think that's kind of a Jezebelian spirit. And for the uninitiated, it basically is a toxic feminine spirit of someone who slowly destroys your country, but looks good doing it, I should say.
Right.
Um, and that's so prevalent, man. Like it's a weird cowardice, especially in men nowadays, and especially in politics and in art. Everything together. That's the thing that this election kind of showed me, is that all this is connected. There is a weird kind of spiritual force around things, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, no, I mean, the election in general, I mean, you could get into somebody who survived like 2 assassination attempts,
We
um,
forget about that.
convicted of multiple, felony, blah, blah. Never mind the fact whether the actual charges that they're brought up, like whatever. Basically, the guy had the kitchen sink thrown at him, and to actually still be elected after multiple convictions, mug shots, multiple assassination attempts, and like a media apparatus that is completely like, I forgot what it was, like 95% negative.
Yeah.
Like to still be elected, like it's very interesting to think about it on a spiritual level, what that means. And I guess people who disagree with me will have a very different take, but I mean, talk about overcoming giant odds.
That's what I was telling my mom. I was like, you know what? Like 200 years ago, they'd be writing folk songs about this guy.
Right. I mean, that gets into like American sort of thing, that somebody who bucks the system is like sort of like an Andrew Jackson type of character, or like I don't know, just some of these Theodore Roosevelt and some of these rough around the edges type guys, and very combative and all of that. Used to do duels back in the day.
Yeah, like that used to be. I mean, what's funny is my friend Spencer Selman just came in the chat, and he's actually a black belt in jujitsu. We talk about that kind of stuff a lot. Is the idea of like physical threat used to be part of like masculine life, and it was just accepted.
Right.
And I've got a son. I mean, that's the thing, is like some places I take him, and like they don't know what to do with a little boy. He's like 1 year old. It's like, you just let him run. You let him break things. You let him break himself. I think like the world really doesn't really know what to do. That's a whole other topic. They don't know what to do with young men,
Right.
and that ties in with the good, the true, and the beautiful. I mean, if you don't pursue those things, especially as a young man, you end up in a very dark place.
Yeah, no, it's the world is finding out what happens when you don't emphasize virtue and don't try and cultivate it in men from a young age. I mean, there comes a point in time where if you haven't been infused with virtue from a young age, once you're an adult, I mean, it gets harder and harder to, people get calcified in their ways. And if you have someone as an adult who's just a bad human being, I mean, it's hard to, it's better to just create a good little human being from the start than to try and take someone who's a bad adult and make them a good person.
Oh yeah, those habits, man. They you can't get rid of them, and that's a whole thing with all this, man, and with art and creation. Is I had this thought the other day, like you just see like growing, and it's kind of like a millennial trope. We've got a whole generation of adults that think the whole world should be designed for them.
Right.
that they should do everything, be able to do anything, especially at the cost of children. And it's like, what would it instead our society look like if we centered children? We'd have to change everything, but you know what? We'd have to change it for the better.
Right.
Like, I'm sorry, I watch My Neighbor Totoro with my daughter. It's the greatest, happiest little film ever. And when you're with them, you're like, this is good for, like, going back to that. Like, if it's good for kids, it's good for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what, especially the election, kind of did for people. Well, that was the statement, especially after that super condescending campaign the Democrats tried of like, no one knows who you voted for, where it was like trying to pitch to women that like they could vote for who, like they had to be afraid of their husbands for who they were voting for or whatever, and then more women than ever voted for Trump.
Yeah, they didn't really know what to do with the results of the election when the exit polls, because they were just like, why are these Hispanic people like voting for Trump in record numbers for Republicans, and like, why did the black male vote just shoot up by like, what was it, like 10%, or I forgot what it was, but it was like, for a Republican getting like, they're like, he keeps getting more and more of the minority vote, and we keep telling them that he's like the most evil person alive. What's going on here?
Well, that's the thing. It's like, hey, did you guys maybe try belittling people more? Maybe that'll make him vote for you. Maybe you insult people more. That'll make it work for you. I don't know, man. Like you've worked in DC. Is it really that? Are people like journalists and pollsters? Are they really that detached from reality?
Yes. Yeah, that's why I don't live there anymore. So they are. I mean, they have it with the belt, quote unquote, beltway or whatever.
Yeah.
So they are in their own little world, and I really believe the longer that you stay in that city, how do I say it? I feel like it really is a magnet for evil, and the longer a politician is there over the course of decades, they will not be principled. They will just become obsessed with power, holding on to power, influence, holding on to it. That's why you see these politicians they can barely even function. They should be retired. They should be by the fireplace with their grandchildren, but they're like rolling them out. Mitch McConnell, he freezes up, and I'm not even making fun of him. Weird seizures and things like that, but he doesn't step down. And I just think it's because the entire city, these people, John McCain, up until he died, didn't he have like brain cancer or whatever? It was like, these people were not stepping down. They can't let go. It's like Lord of like Gollum or whatever with the ring of, they just won't let go of it.
Yeah, it's a horrific way of life, man. Like I think the past couple of years have really shown that kind of thing. It's like these old stories and these old tropes you had in your head of like good and evil just kind of played out over like the past 8 years in unbelievable ways. Like it's the first time in my life I saw people burning things in like cities, and then we saw the government, especially the Fauci stuff, and people just going on TV and just blatantly lying to people and people believing it.
Yeah, I mean, that was weird just because if you actually were using basic biological, speaking of truths to talk about the coronavirus, hopefully I didn't get the algorithm on you there, but
no.
People were saying that you were crazy and you didn't know what you were talking about. And I'm like, I learned this stuff when I was in middle school. Like, this is real science, and you're just making things up about like, if I'm 3 feet away from you, like it's good, but I have to be within our 6 feet, but we're literally in the same exact restaurant. But if I have like a little cloth mask on, but the virus is like literally goes through the mask that you're wearing, but you're pretending as if like it's doing something, like it doesn't do the thing. I don't know. I just felt like everybody went insane for like a year and a half or 2 years or whatever it was.
Yeah, it felt really, really weird. I just remember when like the vaccine stuff rolled out, talking about getting banned off YouTube, right? And it was like, my thing was like, my wife was like breastfeeding, and I was like, you're not injecting anything in your body that has only been around for like 4 months. Like, that's just not going to happen. And like I didn't do it. Like, dude, I'm not. If they just made something like 4 months ago, I'm not putting that in my body. Like I don't care.
Right.
And like my thing was when they were like, oh, like don't go outside, don't get healthy sunshine, don't get air. It's like okay, yeah,
No,
again,
they would say that exercise or whatever is good with bolstering your immune system, but then like the regulation, not even they weren't even like I don't know, they're just like passed by these random communities,
yeah,
committees or whatever. Like you can't go outside, you can't ride your bike, you can't go to the beach, you can't go. Like you're like, okay, so I can't exercise, but exercise is actually what I need for this. Like,
yeah.
okay, this is weird.
Vitamin C, vitamin D, all that stuff. And then what was it in? It's like the UK. They were arresting people for just being at the park. It's like, well, why
Yeah,
are you here?
they have those images of the people that are just alone at the beach and like the cops are just like hauling them off, or you're just like, okay, we've lost the plot here.
Yeah, it was like, oh, you can't do church, but you can do protests.
Right.
It's like okay, just the absolute madness, the state of things, man. Like I think I don't think it's separated. I think everything from the macro political side down to the micro art side and the spiritual side. I think it's all the same, man. I think it's all connected, and it's nice to now have that idea of at least the chance for what we've been talking about: the good, the true, and the beautiful, and the dynamic. Oh yeah, let me put that out there. Yeah, Spencer, you're right. They crushed small businesses doing that. That was probably the most egregious thing.
Yeah, they
Uh,
would keep like Lowe's and Home Depot and Walmart
mm-hmm.
open, but the small mom and pop businesses had to close.
Yeah,
Just these totally arbitrary rules where you're like, oh, I see. There's money involved here, and the mom and pop store, don't have the money you want. Gavin Newsom could go to like wine
oh
country
gosh,
and,
yeah,
these Michelin star, 5-star, um, restaurants are open in Napa Valley or wherever it is, but the Mexican place in downtown Los Angeles has to close down. Okay.
yeah. I don't know, just the sheer ridiculous. I'm glad we kind of saw that and got it out of the way before we actually had like a full blown like communist takeover, because that's how things were feeling for a while. Like, okay, we've allowed a lot of crap.
Yeah, no, it was sad because the media put wedges between family members, and people said things to their own family members that they probably regret. I was the only one in my family that didn't get the shots, and that caused some issues without getting into details.
Yeah,
So, it's just, I have a thing against the media and the lies that they told people, because people that are close to me believed things that are literally been proven to be lies.
yeah.
And at the time when I was like, they're lying to you, I was the bad guy, and you're just like, okay.
Well, Doug, I'm gonna have to cut it there, man. I gotta go put the kids down a little bit. But wonderful talk, man. I'd love to do this again. I feel like I could talk with you about another 8 hours with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, man. Anytime. We'll always set something up. I apologize. I felt not sharp tonight. I felt like I was in a little bit of a brain fog. So I'm sorry if I wasn't the guest I needed to be tonight.
Dude, it's all right. I've got bronchitis or something. I'm not on it either. Whatever we said, I'm sure will get reported to us on Twitter, right?
Cool.
All right. Have a good night, man. See you,
Cool. See
everybody.
ya.